12 top tax experts have asked the Chancellor to consider a new approach for taxpayers facing what's called the loan charge. Now, you'll remember we've covered this loan charge several times on Moneybox. 50,000 people have been told they owe tens of thousands of pounds, more in some cases, to Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs due to the way they were employed and paid in the past. Now, these demands have caused serious financial hardship and in some cases devastating personal consequences. Sarah Gabbai is a corporate tax lawyer at McDermott, Will and Emery. She coordinated this letter to the Chancellor. Sarah Gabbai, just begin, if you would, briefly by reminding listeners what the loan charge is and why it's causing people such difficulties.
Yes, certainly. The loan charge is essentially a piece of anti-avoidance legislation that is designed to counter the use of disguised remuneration schemes. But the reason why it has been so controversial is that it has effectively allowed HMRC to rectify the fact that it had not collected the pay-as-you-earn income tax from the employers under these schemes, which they should have done under the PAYE regulations. And because they are now too late to do so, the loan charge effectively allows these it allows HMRC to have a second bite at the cherry.
Yes, and we've heard many times on the programme, though the government denies it, that this is retrospective legislation. For that reason, you talk about disguised remunerations. I mean, as I understand it, people were paid by way of a loan rather than sort of money in their bank, and that meant it was thought they didn't have to pay tax on it because it was a loan, even if it was never repaid. Just explain your solution. How would that work?
So what we have is essentially a deadlock between HMRC and affected users of these schemes. Because the problem is that many of these users were inadvertently dragged into these schemes, or they were either missold to. What we're proposing is essentially a settlement opportunity that would allow affected taxpayers to settle their tax affairs on individually negotiated and, importantly, affordable terms that would give credit for those who had tried to be compliant in the past.
Yes, but the Revenue says it does let people make settlements, doesn't it? It told Moneybox specifically, we are committed to working with taxpayers to enter manageable payment plans to spread their tax liability and ensure they're affordable. What does your solution do that HMRC at least says it does already?
Well, the problem is that the amounts that have been collected by HMRC already are by definition paid by those who have been able to afford it, and presumably also by those who were able to submit their returns by the 30th of September 2020 deadline. What our proposal is suggesting is that because there are tens of thousands of people who haven't been able to do this, and who, because simply they cannot pay the sums being demanded of them, this settlement award should follow some basic guidelines. And the first of those guidelines is that it should reflect the fact that HMRC should have relied on the agency rules of the Employment Income Tax Code, and it should have collected the pay-as-you-earn income tax by those means. So ironically, had it done so, it would have collected more tax than by means of the loan charge.
Now, you mentioned people being missold or poorly advised. How can you distinguish between those who were naive, and we've talked to several of them on the programme in the past, and some of those who may actually have thought, pay less tax, that sounds good?
I don't think you can. However, I don't necessarily think it makes sense to ask that question or to go down that road, because as soon as you start going down that road, you have to prove a person's state of mind, which is very difficult. So it's not a very practical solution.
Okay.
Basically, our proposal would be open to anyone who believes that they have been duped into participating in these schemes. And while one can say, well, yes, there might be a risk of fraudulent claims being made, in my view, and in the view of many other senior members of the tax profession, that risk is far outweighed by the benefit it would give to the vast majority of those who were only trying to be compliant with the law all along.
And Sarah Gabbai, I'm going to ask you just in a word, you've got a very high-powered group of barristers and so on with you. There have been many suggestions before about how to solve this. Do you think you'll get a favourable answer?
Well, I haven't heard any response yet, but I think what I would urge HMRC and the Treasury to do is to look at this as a financial scandal. It is not a case of deliberate tax avoidance here.
Okay.
We are talking about people who
So-
have been missold, who were inadvertently dragged into these schemes.
So-
It is very easy to get dragged into these schemes, and there's been a recent case in the first tier tribunal which shows just how easy it is.
Sarah Gabbai, thanks very much for talking to us.